And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Vincent Ollivier from France, who during his near-death experience saw four beings waiting for him in a bright light, which we're going to learn about and more. Vincent, thank you for joining me and welcome.
Thank you for having me as a guest on your show. I'm very honored.
Well, we're honored to have you. And Vincent, let's start on the day that you died and go from there.
Certainly. I will take you just a few days before because that's when it all started.
Mm-hmm.
It's an evening, it's a Thursday evening, and I'm sitting at a restaurant with my wife. It's a time in my life where I'm quite busy professionally, but also I'm thinking of doing a career change, and I'm studying massage therapy and more therapeutic type of activities. I feel that I need to press pause in my life. My better half has some concerns about the level of activity I do have in terms of studying, working hard, and so on. And whilst we're sitting at the restaurant and just enjoying our meal, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I do feel a sharp stabbing sensation on my right side, on the right side of my abdomen. And the sensation doesn't go away. At first, I'm thinking that I might just be stressed, and there's nothing more than that because I'm quite stressed when that happens. But we go back home, and the sensation doesn't go away. If anything, the pain is just getting stronger and stronger. It goes into cycles and it gets so strong that I can barely sleep through the night. So in the early hours of the morning, we decide to call the emergency services. And because I was living in the United Kingdom at the time, so it's 999, we give them a call and they suggest that I am being taken to the nearest hospital just to see a doctor. So my wife drives me, and as I arrive at the hospital, I'm in so much pain that I almost collapse on the floor at the hospital, and I'm very quickly being checked. And the doctor, after looking at me and doing a few checks, rules that because I've been to the restaurant the night before, it might just be indigestion. And I'm not too sure about that because deep down, I've had indigestion before, and I know it's just not the same level of pain. There's something different. Nonetheless, she gives me some medication, and I start to feel better right away. So I'm thinking maybe she's got a point. Maybe I had just an episode of food poisoning. So we go back home, but I'm not getting any better. If anything, my situation keeps deteriorating. And it carries on for a couple more days until the early hours of Sunday morning this time, where after having endured like ever increasing cycles of pain in my abdomen region, we resort to calling the emergency services once more. And this time, they decide to send an ambulance. Imagine a very cold January morning, quite early, and the paramedic comes into my property, and I'm laying on the sofa, still crippled by intense amounts of pain. The paramedic asks me questions as usual, and at that time I feel a bit frustrated because it's about the third time that I've answered the same set of questions, and I have to repeat myself, and it seems like nothing is really improving for me. And over the past hours, I've been repeatedly saying to my wife, I'm dying. I feel like I'm dying. So the paramedic, after having taken a few notes, starts giving me some painkillers. And he decides that he will inject the painkillers through IV. And I start to feel the very unpleasant sensation of a warm liquid trickling down my veins. But I start to feel a bit better. He also gives me a mask, and it explains to me that these are some medical gases and I need to put the mask on my face and I need to inhale quite deeply and exhale the same. So I start doing that. And at that moment, my wife is standing by me. I'm laying down on the sofa. The paramedic turns his back and continues to fill in the form. I take no more than a couple of deep breaths. and I find myself in a completely different environment. All of a sudden, everything becomes black around me, pitch black. I can't see a thing. What's interesting is I'm conscious, but I don't realize right away that I've changed environment. It's almost a moment of relief for me. And I sort of float in that dark space without thinking about anything, without even feeling anything from a physical sensation standpoint. And after, I can't really quantify how long, I get to see a tiny speck of light in the distance. And I'm quite curious and fascinated by that little speck of light. But as soon as I look at it, it's like I'm being sent towards it at the speed of light, and it grows bigger and bigger almost instantly. As I approach that light, right away, I notice that there are the silhouettes of four beings within that bright light. I cannot really tell for sure if they're in front of the light or behind the light. The light is just so bright. And I kind of slow down when I approach the light. And I take the time to observe who those beings are, because at that moment, I just cannot see their face. So they seem to me completely unknown. And three of them look about the same size, and there's a fourth one, a bit more in the background, that looks much taller than the other three. And I do have that sensation that there are some feminine energies. The taller one could be a more masculine energy. Again, I cannot really see who they are. And yet, there's a moment when I'm realizing that I know them, despite the fact that I cannot physically describe them. And that moment of realization also brings the moment of realization that actually, if I'm seeing you right now, this is just not good. It's absolutely not a good sign. And the first person I think of for some reason is my wife. And I have that instant connection that brings me back to, hey, what's happening right now? Actually, I think that I'm dying. And those four people waiting for me, I know I do have that very strong family connection with them that I cannot explain. I like to say that they felt more family to me than my own family in this life. And I was very drawn to know who they were. Yet at the same time, I completely panicked at the idea of dying. And there's a reason for that, because I've had quite a few encounters with death in the past too. But the moment I'm realizing that I'm about to die, I say something that came completely out of my heart. And if you excuse me for the language, I mixed up English and French, and I said, no f***ing way, pas maintenant. And pas maintenant would translate in English to not now. So basically I said, no F way, not now. I'm too young. I cannot die now. I'm not accepting that. And it seems that my request was accepted right away without even like any emotions or feelings from the other side. And it was just like, okay. So I feel being sucked back right away and back into my body. And to me, the sensation is like opening my eyes again and finding my wife patting my shoulder, looking completely alarmed and saying to me, are you okay? Are you okay? I'm confused. So I look around. I'm like, what am I doing there? What's just happened? So I look back at her and I say, yeah, I'm okay. I'm okay. And strangely, in an almost scientific manner, I grabbed the oxygen mask that had fallen on the floor. And I try to replicate that. And I say, was it just a hallucination or have I just lived that? So I take a couple more deep breaths. Nothing's happening. I look around. The paramedic is still taking notes. My wife looks a bit more reassured, but she's giving me a really strange look as, you look very confused, darling. What's with you? And then what happens is the pain, the physical pain, comes back in like a big wave that would be hitting a lighthouse. I realize at that moment, as the pain comes back and cripples my body again, that, hang on a second, a moment ago, I was completely pain-free from a physical standpoint. I don't know exactly where I was or what had happened, but there was no physical pain. So it is really strange to me. Again, I grab the mask and I try to breathe, nothing happens. And I've got a bit of moment of feeling sad and thinking, well, maybe I made the wrong decision. I should have stayed on the other side because I was pain free, because I had no emotional toll or anything. Everything was just like very calm and very relaxing. So I do have this moment where I'm thinking, damn it, I've made a mistake. I should have stayed on the other side. But as the pain comes back and the paramedic turns around and he says, hey, young man, we have to rush you to the hospital. And from that moment on, something quite surprising happens because I'm not aware of anyone who's had a near-death experience recounting that, but I forgot about the ND itself. So I had to focus on the journey to the hospital. Once at the hospital, they did a couple of checks. Very quickly, they told me that it was basically I was living with a ticking bomb inside of me, and I did not know about it. And it had just sort of detonated. And there were no symptoms that would have like foretold me or warned me that this could happen. So they tell me as well at the hospital that I will have to undergo surgery, is very likely, and it's a very heavy surgery. So for me, like I've been to hospital before because when I was younger, I've had two back-to-back emergency surgery, and I'm kind of used to the process, but I'm like, bummer, here I am again. Death is chasing me again. What is it with my life that I keep meeting with death quite regularly? So in the evening, I've got no choice but to accept that I'm staying at the hospital. There's a first surgeon that comes in, and right away he offers to take me to surgery and do surgery right away. And I just have such a bad feeling about that surgeon that I pushed him back and I said, no, I want to try non-invasive method if we can. And with my wife, we ended up calling him, I shouldn't say that maybe, but we called him the psychopath because he really had a psychopath look in his eyes. And the reason I'm mentioning it is quite important because I resisted going with that guy for a couple of days. But 3 days later, another surgeon came in and he really understood my case and my physical condition and so on. And we really gelled. We had that great connection. And he said, listen, you're not going to have a choice, Vincent. You're going to have to undergo surgery. I will be the one doing it. And so we agreed that because I'm quite young and fit, don't do anything more than what is necessary. So the surgery goes on absolutely fine. And when I wake up from the surgery, he actually told me, say, I was tempted to do more, but I remembered our conversation that we agreed that because you're young and fit, you will recover pretty quickly. However, I want you to take it easy because you seem like a sporty person and I know you could rush your recovery. It's a serious surgery you've had. Be very careful. And then what I've learned after the surgery is the morbidity rate for that specific type of surgery is 40%. So 2 out of 5 people don't make it through. And that sent a chill down my spine because I thought about the first surgeon. And I was like, throughout this stay in the hospital for those few days, I remembered that there had been a decision somewhere, somehow, that I was going to be fine. I could not really remember why, but I felt like things were happening in a way where if I did follow my intuition, everything would turn out to be okay. So I get back home after the hospital and surgery, and the road to recovery is quite a long one. Technically, it's 18 months, which is a hell of a lot of time when you're young. But the first 6 months, basically, you recover to 80%, quite quickly. And then it's incremental 10% in 6 to 12, and then last 10% in the last 6 months. But following the surgery, again, I had no memory of the NDE. Interestingly, I would joke from time to time with people and say, "Oh, I did see the light, but I decided to come back." But it's like the memory itself of what had happened was completely escaping me. So I was focusing back on my physical rehab, on my mental rehab, and my psychological rehab. And I was still living with a great deal of fear of dying because I was told that what had occurred could reoccur anytime. So there was no guarantee that I would be fine for the rest of my life. But at the same time, I was also convinced that I had to push myself, that I had to try new things, that I had to change my life, that I had to get back on track. So I really had a drive to do things that I was not doing before. And I always tell people that for me, 2018 was actually a great year. It just started very badly on the wrong foot. But the rest of the year has been a fantastic year for me because I completely reinvented myself as a person. Yet, there was nothing spiritual about that reinvention. Actually, if you had come to me and talked to me about spiritual topics, I would have rejected it at the time. I would have said, nope, none of it is true, none of it exists, and so on. What really changed is a few months later, in September of the same year, for a reason that still is unknown to me, my mom sent me an article and she said, like, oh, I would be too scared to try it, but I'm sure that would be of interest to you. And the article was about a French doctor. And that doctor was fascinated about near death experiences. And he wanted to study that. And he had partnered with a hypnotherapist to create a method or a protocol that actually would take people back, like through the process of a near death experience, but without the physical ailment or the physical pain and the very dangerous situation that you're in when you have a near death experience. And as I read this article, A, I found it fascinating, but B, the writer of the article had submitted himself to the hypnosis session. And he recounted how he was floating in a dark void to start with, how all of a sudden there was a light. And as he went towards the light, it grew bigger and he met with beings in that light. And those beings were spirits explaining to him the spirit world and so on. And I remember reaching the end of the article and thinking, this feels so familiar to me. I can't explain why. So I read the article again, especially the part about being in a dark void and or floating in a dark void and going towards a light. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, the memory of the ND flooded back to my mind or to my memory. But still, I was thinking, yeah, but maybe I've just hallucinated all this. Who's to tell? So that evening, I ask my wife and I say, hey, darling, do you remember that Sunday morning when the paramedic was in the house and just before I was being rushed to hospital? I remember at one point you had your hand on my shoulder and you asked me if I was okay. Can you tell me what happened? Because we had never really covered that topic. We were just focusing on what had happened after the surgery. And she looks at me and her face becomes completely pale. And she says to me, well, I've never really wanted to tell you that, but I thought you were dead. I said, how so? Well, she replies that I was holding the mask and I was breathing through the mask, and all of a sudden she saw my hand fall and the mask fall on the floor. And she said, basically, you look lifeless. I looked in your eyes and it's like there was no life in your eyes. So that's where I touched you. I was about to panic and I was about to scream. The paramedic was, had his back turned to you, so couldn't see you. But as I touched your shoulders, like a couple of seconds later, you seemed to re-emerge from wherever your consciousness was, and you looked very confused as well. And you were looking at me like almost as if you did not recognize me. And then after That's when you sort of like took the oxygen mask and tried to breathe again. I didn't really understand what you were trying to do. You just say, I'm fine, and I was reassured. So I explained to her what I just read and the memory I've had about the near-death experience. And the fact that to me, it felt like I was opening my eyes again when I came back into my body. But she said, no, actually, your eyes were open the whole time. But I said to her, do you realize what this means? Because that's quite important for me. You are actually my witness. And also, there was kind of a discrepancy of timing because what you observed perhaps lasted 2 to 3 seconds, whereas for me, I would have said, 1 to 2 minutes perhaps. So time was not the same the way we experienced it. And at that moment, really, for me, who I've had a fear of death all my life, I was just lifted off my shoulders. The relief, all of a sudden, I just was, gosh, consciousness continues to exist after we go. That's amazing. I was actually quite overjoyed by that because all of a sudden, death was just not meaningless, but the fear of death had just disappeared completely of me. And that's quite interesting too, to me, that I managed to forget about such an experience because you would think that how can one forget about such an important experience in their life? Yet it happened. And I'm pretty certain it's here because of what I had to go ahead. I had to really be mentally and physically focused on the journey in the hospital. And it was only when I was really prepared to reopen the door to that experience that something came along, a synchronicity, my mom sending me that article and me reconnecting with that experience.
What was your medical condition that caused all this?
So basically, at the age of just before I was 10 years old, I was living in Africa with my parents and I had my appendix removed, but I was also having, in parallel to that, sort of a brain tumor developing. So I never, that brain tumor following the surgery of the appendix left me half paralyzed. And I had to be rushed back to France to, again, be operated on that. So what happened is because my body was also dealing or fighting with another part of the body itself, the removal of the appendix, that surgery never healed properly. And essentially, what was happening from a medical term was inside my abdominal wall, I had scar tissue that had formed. And basically, instead of the intestines like smoothly moving along your abdominal wall, they are starting to become stuck. And one day, my intestine made a knot on itself. So basically, I couldn't pass any food. And yeah, if you're not operated, it's just you die. There's no other alternative there. That's the medical condition that was behind it.
It's interesting because my first thought was, sounds like he has a ruptured appendix or something. But without that knowledge, I didn't know that it had already been taken out.
That had happened before without any ND at the time.
Who is the French doctor that had been studying the near-death experiences?
And not for the sake of me remember the name right now, but I can send that to you afterwards if you want.
Sure. Have you had hypnotherapy done on you? And if so, what did you see?
I had the hypnotherapy done like a year and a half later, and it was what they call past life hypnotherapy, and it was quite fascinating to do. I was exploring all that spiritual journey, following the remembrance of the NDE. For me, I had just opened the door to a brand new world, and I was trying to understand everything around the metaphysical or the spirit world and so on. And I thought, like, if I do that sort of past life regression hypnosis, maybe I'll learn a thing or two. And indeed, I saw myself in two different extraterrestrial life forms. The first one being your sort of classical, almost little gray being, except we had like very dark brown skin, but we were like in a spaceship and going onto a planet and basically taking notes and observing life on this planet, which was kind of more animal life. And the other extraterrestrial life was more around the, how would I put it? Kind of a very small spiritual civilization of maybe like 200 people, or a community of 200. And they were living underground, and they were only going out of the ground at night to escape predators. And there were very little beings, very, but very squarish. So a square face, square body, quite small, and with a very light gray skin. And I basically got to see a bit more of, is it truly a past life, or are you just tapping into the big tapestry of the Akashic records? Who's to tell? But I was connected to that specific life, and essentially, I saw myself from like being a kid in that community to growing up and actually doing healing on animals. So there was a bird that had a broken wing, and through energy we would repair the wing of the bird and set him free once fully healed, and to becoming an elder in that community and teaching the younger ones. And it was basically seeing like cycles repeating themselves. And through the hypnosis session, I also had an encounter with an ascended master. Um, and out of the blue, I see Jesus, or Yeshua. And it was very much like an image, like, the one you would see in a church. And it's interesting what happened during that session, because he took my hand and we were just like floating like best buddies in the sea of stars. And he takes me to a big white light, and he gently pushes me inside the light. And I don't know exactly, I take it as also it's very imaginary, or it's a lot of images and analogies when you do hypnosis sessions. But basically, within that light, we have a bit of a conversation, and it really tells me to relax into the light, not to fear it. And we talk about some life things, and he gives me a couple of advice about what I could do in life, for example, or dreams I've had and that I should actually make come true in life and not wait for a later in my life. But after that, he pushes me actually from on the other side of the light. So, and he says, go explore. And I find myself exploring the creation of the universe and so many different planets and universes. It was quite a fascinating journey to do that. I didn't see any past life as a human, nor did I really experience any event that had happened in this life through the hypnosis. It was really, extraterrestrial life, or completely being on what we would label as a spirit side, perhaps.
I know that you felt like those beings were familiar, they were like family, but you really couldn't recognize who they were. Do you think it's possible that those beings were also extraterrestrials?
So at first, I wasn't too sure if they were 100% human or not from the energy. I could just feel if they were masculine or feminine. I wasn't too sure. I thought that they could be extraterrestrial for many years, actually, because following the NDE, I started to have more and more lucid dreams. And in those lucid dreams, I was always meeting with some regular people, and one of them being like a small alien, like a little gray, with a very dark black skin. And she told me one day that she was one of my guides, spirit guides. So I thought for a long time that the four people were potentially, some of them could be extraterrestrials. And that changed, or that belief changed in November last year, because during a lucid dream that felt more like an out of body experience, I got to meet with them again during that dream. And it's a very strange dream because it happened on the night of the 11th of November. And I know a lot of people will say, well, that was the 11/11 portal. I'm not necessarily a big believer in those things, but I must confess that something really strange happened to me that night, because I found myself like in the middle of a small village that very much resembled like a village in South England in the Cotswolds. So stone properties, thatched roofs, and so on. And I'm all alone. There are no cars, there's nobody. But I know I'm about to surprise some people. I can't explain why. And everything around me feels very real. And if you allow me to share that dream very, very briefly,
Sure.
they, I'm standing on my own and waiting, and all of a sudden I hear a voice. And the voice says, Vincent, is that you? And I turn around and I see a woman who's like in her mid 20s or early 30s. She's got blonde, curly hair. I don't know her, like, but instantly she runs towards me and is like, wow, why are you doing that? It's so good to see you. And she gives me a hug, and everything feels very real. Like if I'm really hugging that person, I can feel like, the texture of the clothes, the smell of her hair, and so on. And at the same time, I'm like, I'm in a dream. So it's really weird that it's so physical, so real. That's why I say it probably was more of an OB, but I just don't remember consciously leaving my body. A second voice comes from the left too, and that voice says, is Vincent here? And another lady comes in, and a woman comes in, and same like blonde lady, smaller this time. And she runs and she's completely in awe that I'm around, and I'm smiling like I know that I'm surprising them. A third woman comes and she gives me a big hug as well, and she says, wow, so nice to see you. Didn't expect you to be there. And I replied to her, and I still don't know how, why, but that's what came to me. I said, well, I was there in April this year, so April 2023. Uh, but the village was empty and I didn't see any of you guys. And she looks back and thinks, and like, yeah, well, I think we were busy with some other project or whatever. She says we were not around at that time. That's why the village would have been empty. And there are more villagers that are coming around, so a group of about 20 people. And in that group, there's a very tall guy, a very tall man. And I'm like, I feel like I've seen you before too. So I look at the four people that I really recognize or feel a connection with. And they look back at me, smiling. And I have the exact same sensation than during the near death experience. I know they are family. I know that I know them from other lifetimes, perhaps, or from the other side. Still, it's very frustrating. I'm seeing them, I see their physical features, but I still cannot tell what my relationship to them is. And they seem to know that, and they seem to be quite amused by it, but they're not telling me what the relationship is. The only memory that came back was when I saw the tall guy, because I came to him, he had quite a bushy beard, and I said, well, I could give you an advice or two on how to trim it and maintain it properly. And we joked, and I remember that in many of my lucid dreams, I've seen a kind of apocalyptic moment where sea waters were about to rise very fast. And I'm with that tall guy, and when I say tall, he's like 7'2", something like that, because I'm 6'4", and he's literally towering me. But we try to warn as many people as we can, and of course, would you have it? Plenty of many don't listen at all, and so we find a high elevation point, and it's always the same sort of patterns that repeats itself, and we see water coming in as it's like a tsunami, and people being engulfed, and then we're a small community of people, and once the flood episode has calmed down, we go and see if we can find survivors or rebuild somewhere. And that's where I felt the connection with, at least with the taller guy and with the other three women. Maybe that's how they've chosen to project themselves or to display themselves. But there definitely was more of a human element this time to them. Perhaps they are my guides. They didn't tell me. I feel like guides could change. So maybe, that little alien was my guide for a while. And then after she moved, she was replaced by somebody else. But I definitely had the same sensation that during the ND, this time I could put a face on them. I still cannot tell you what the relationship with them is, which is highly frustrating as I'm sharing that story, because I would love to be in a position to maybe next time I see them in dream state.
You mentioned that you didn't fear death anymore after your NDE. Besides that, did you notice that you had any new abilities that could be considered psychic afterwards?
So perhaps not new abilities, but I was able to tap in a more relaxed way to existing abilities that I had. And one of them was helping souls that are lost cross over. Because I did not realize I had that ability. Um, Basically, in the process of falling asleep, a lot of things do happen to me when I'm asleep. I'm very conscious of my dreams. But in the process of falling asleep, most people just fall asleep and find themselves in a dream. I would be very conscious of all the steps that are happening before I find myself in dream state. And very often I would have people coming at me, or coming to me, sorry, and they were human looking. Some of them could have like blood on their face, or they look like they had an accident of some sort. But they would come to me and they would speak to me, but very often they would speak to me in a language that I do not understand. And it would be very frustrating. And at the same time, also, I would be very fearful of them before the ND, because I would think like, what do they want? Are they kind of a bad spirit? Are they going to attach to me, or are they going to capture me? Like, I feel like I'm not in control of what's happening in that situation. Following the NDE, and I understood a bit more what was happening, like, and I thought like, perhaps these are lost spirits. And I tried to communicate with them more. Of course, there was the language barrier at first, because imagine someone's talking to you in Hindi or Arabic, and you're like, well, I can speak English, French, or Spanish. Can't you pick one of those for me, please? And they would get frustrated too, because I would not be in a position to help them. But what I've discovered is I could establish sort of an energy communication with them and tell them that if we're having that encounter right now, or if you're meeting me, and given how you look, it's just a probability that perhaps you're dead. And what I would advise you is, either look for a light, or either look within, or if you need any support, like come with me, because I'm sort of like shifting to dream state, and I will not be conscious of what happens when I get into dream, but maybe I can take you to another level. And that started to happen more and more regularly once I got the hang of how to communicate with those beings that I would think would be lost souls in my perception. But that became also a problem, because I got to a point where I would have like 1,000 every night before I fell asleep. They would come to me, and I started to feel a bit frustrated by that, because at one point I'm like, I've got a day job, I've got to have a good night's sleep. It's very nice to be helping you, but is there a way we could, have you to all cross in one go? And I don't know if anyone's ever done like, or if you've done, maybe people in the audience would know, but computer coding, and when you do like database, for example, say you run like a clothing store, and you want to know in your database how many items you have of a specific t-shirt or whatever. But there's a line of command where you can say select star from whatever the name of the database, and that command will basically, a line of command will basically return all the items, so you could see the full stock you have. And I remember sort of talking to your universe jokingly and said, is there a way to do like a select star on all lost spirits and help them cross over? And that was a very genuine intention from my part, although I'm like, I'm not even sure that this is all real, this is happening, I'm dealing with it as it happens. What degree of validity does it have? I'm not certain. But as I said that, I was not even anticipating what would happen, but I see hundreds and thousands of spirits all coming in one go and saying, yes, please. And there's a voice that comes like, seems like almost like on a big microphone that says, good idea, Vincent, but no, cannot happen. It would be way too complicated if we let it happen. And I remember like almost being disappointed by the answer. and thinking, well, perhaps one day we will have to find a way. I don't know exactly how that works on the other side, but I would suggest that maybe you start working on that. So it's one of those experiences that do happen. I take it very lightly in a sense that, yes, I was perhaps really helping lost souls cross over. Yet at the same time, it calmed down after that episode when I thought about that select star idea. It would happen from time to time now. It's very, very occasional that I do have that. So that seems to be the only ability that I've rediscovered and I've become more comfortable dealing with following the remembrance of the near death experience.
You're the author of the book, The Man Who Kept Dying. And in your life, you've had other times where you've come close to death or had an NDE. Can you tell us about those?
Certainly. So my first encounter with death was when I was a month old. So I cannot really remember it. But my parents were driving me to see my grandparents for the first time. And they had a car accident. And you have to think about early 80s. So, car safety wasn't as good as it is today. Same, with like all the child seats and so on. So I basically, nobody was injured during the accident, thankfully, but I flew around the car. And my mom said, I was crying and very upset. But thankfully, I think, yeah, as babies, we are very malleable. So I was able to endure that because, yeah, I literally flew around the car. So for me, I don't know if it is that episode specifically, but when I was growing up, I was really fearing death for some reason. And I also had dreams when I recurring dreams. And one of them, I was like 4, 5, 6 years old, was about being chased by a group of people, trying to escape them, finding myself in the dead alleyway of a big city, turning around, and this group of 6 to 8 people would just like shoot me with guns. And that was reoccurring all the time, this dream, which was quite violent when you think about it when for a kid, a very young kid. So I was always fearing death and thinking, well, why, for whatever reason, I feel that if I die, I will have to come back. And even as a kid, I had that understanding. And around the age of 10, yes, I've had, as just mentioned, the removal of my appendix that was apparently taken a bit late, plus what was similar to a brain tumor, and that left me half paralyzed. And I recovered from the surgeries of all that, no problem. I grew up as a normal teenager. I had no side effects. And at the age of 17, I was involved in another car accident as a passenger again. The driver just lost control of the car because of bad markings on the road. And the last memory I have is of the car about to hit the side of the road. And where I was sitting as a passenger was where the impact was going to happen. And I remember crossing my hands saying, no, knowing full well that I'm about to die and there's no going back from there. And everything becomes black. And then I open my eyes again and I'm looking towards a bright blue sky. I'm smelling the grass in the summer and the tarmac as well. And I realize that I'm laying on the side of the road. And behind me is a broken car. And I still cannot compute exactly what was happening in that moment. But there's a firefighter that comes next to me and says, you've had a car accident. Are you okay? And, and after that, I had absolutely no physical issue whatsoever, absolutely intact, bar a few scars when I got out of the car. But when I looked at a picture of the car after the accident, I still wonder how I made it alive because the car was completely flattened where I was sitting. Because once it hit the side of the road, it went on its roof and crossed the road again. So again, nobody was injured. And I remember at that stage, I was talking with one of my grandmothers because I had really great relationships with my grandparents, my parents, and so on. But more specifically, so with my grandmothers. And with my grandmother on my father's side, I did ask her one day, and I said, "Listen, I have this question that's been nagging me for years now. I know there are people who go through a lot more in their life. And I know there are people who go through more difficult situations health-wise. But if you were to, you know, cross path with me in the street, you would not know that I've died almost 4 times and that I shouldn't even be there because, bar a few scars on my body, nobody would ever be able to tell. So, why is it that some people would die for a lot less than what I've gone through? Yet I'm still standing there talking to you. And the reply she gave to me has stayed with me to this day because she said, with all the wise personality she had, very simple, she smiled and said, well, that's because you haven't done what you came here to do. And I queried her. I said, okay, so why is it that I came here to do? She replied, well, that's for you to figure out. I cannot tell you, but it could be as simple as, just leading a life and, meeting the love of your life, having kids. That's enough. That is enough to make a difference. So I remember always thinking like, okay, maybe I've got something to do in this life, and maybe that's why I should still be there. But the fear of death was still very much present until the near-death experience.
Initially, you couldn't remember the NDE until you got the letter or the flyer or something, the advertisement, and then they all came back. Once all the memories came back, are they still there or have they been fading over time?
They are still there. Every time I'm sharing the story, it's like I'm reliving it. And every time I'm sharing the story, it takes quite a lot of energy to share it because I feel like I'm in that dark void floating again. I feel like I'm being drawn to that light again. I feel the energy of the beings again. And it's it's strange because it's a memory. The dream from the 11th of November seems this one has faded away a bit more. But the near-death experience itself and coming back into the body, or just before that, also saying, nope, I'm realizing I'm dying and I do not want that to happen. Coming back into the body, feeling the pain, crippling my body again. All this feels as it has just happened. Yeah, I've never forgotten the sensations associated with that experience.
You wrote your book as a fictional story based on your life. Why did you do it that way?
So, the idea of writing a book has always been with me ever since I was a teenager. I had a few, I wouldn't call them intuition, but callings maybe. One of those callings was you have to go live in an English speaking country, which did happen quite early in my professional career. The opportunity came and I snatched it right away. Another calling was that one day I would be writing a book. I had no idea about what, I had no idea when. All I knew that it would be inspired from events from my life. And being young, I thought like that will probably happen when I retire, and I will tell stories that I've lived through my life because I would have lived like a very adventurous life, perhaps, or things around those lines. But when I did the hypnosis sessions, one of the advice I did receive was to not wait to publish that book. And then the choice of the format was mine. And I decided that it's quite easy to go online or to share the story of the NDE. There are many people who experience NDEs. I don't recommend it to anyone though, because it means like you're in a bad health situation. But I thought like, because my NDE seemed so short in comparison to the other grand adventures that some people do live, I would like to explore what would have really happened if I had crossed over the light, if I had not said, no, I don't want to die. And what would have happened? And would the four beings would have actually told me like you need to go back? Would they have, teach me or taught me about the metaphysical world and so on? So I've got a copy there. Um, I'm using the format of a fiction to give me the flexibility to actually explore themes such as past life, spirit guides, parallel realities, the illusion of time, the nature of God, mastery, self love, and all those parameters. And to the book, I do include many slices or experiences in my life. So the car accident I had at the age of 17 is one chapter in the book, except it's not seen from the main character's viewpoint, it's seen from something else viewpoint, which is not even human. And so I was really, it's a way of playing and taking readers on a spiritual journey, but in a slightly different format than the usual one, where, yeah, I could tell you about the near-death experience and all the experiences I've had afterwards and what I've learned. I thought it'd be easier to share it in the format of a story that is a fiction. And I like to say it's a beautiful story. I really put all my heart, my soul, and my energy into that because I wrote it during my free time, having a full-time job. And it also is a labor of love because it took me about 3 years to write and then publish. It's written in English, but it's been reviewed by professional copywriter and proofreaders, so the English is top notch. it's but yeah, it's been a nice journey, and it's been really wonderful the day I published it, because I felt like I had achieved another one of my callings that I had in my life.
If people want to find out more about it, should they go to Amazon or your website?
I don't have a website. You can go to Amazon. You can type the title, "The Man Who Kept Dying." It should pop up. Alternatively, I've got a YouTube channel and an Instagram account. Both are named "The Man Who Kept Dying" or Vincent Ollivier. If you look that up, there will be links that redirect you to the book, and actually that will redirect you to the right geographical region for Amazon if you're not based in the US, for example.
Before we started recording, I just happened to mention UFOs and stuff to you, and you mentioned that you had seen one, but it was before your NDE. And now that I learned that during your hypnotherapy you saw ETs, do you think it's possible that the UFO that you saw were your ET family checking in on you?
I've never thought about this question actually, because the experience of seeing the UFO was such a strange one. And to give you a bit of context, I saw it. I was in when I was living in the UK, and I was living in a flat, and we had this quite a tall building, like on the other side of the road, that was a hotel. And one day I see something that looks odd and through the window, and I'm looking at it and thinking, gosh, that small plane is flying very low to the ground. And what I see makes no sense whatsoever from a rational standpoint. And I see a triangular shaped object flying that divides itself in two. One goes in front of the building, the hotel building. The other part goes behind it. And my wife was next to me, and I just like nudged her and said, "Look at that." She turns around and she sees the two triangles rejoin as one and zoom in a distance without making a single noise or sound. And we looked at each other in disbelief, and I had perhaps the good reflex to say, "Let's grab a sheet of paper and let's draw what we've both seen, just to see if it compares or how it compares." And we both drew the exact same thing, like two triangular objects rejoining into one and moving away in a distance. I never knew what to make out of that, aside from it makes no sense because it was in plain daylight, a Saturday afternoon. There should have been many witnesses. I looked online for the days that followed, and it seemed like only me and my wife and I were able to see that through the little window of our flat. So it seems like the way I took it at the time was like, some people can see them sometimes, and it seems that they make themselves appear, perhaps at will, to some people when those people are ready. And I've always been curious about UFO, but I've never been, how to say, like a fanatic, investigating and so on. But I've always been curious whether they were my star family or my spirit family. Possibly, it could very well be the case. On that day, I think I took it more as hey, keep your mind open, because my brain had a real hard time computing what it had seen. It could not. At first, I thought it was a plane, then a helicopter. I think the brain tries to match it to some objects it knows in reality, and it's a really strange exercise. And perhaps there was already a way of saying, yeah, open the door in your mind to more metaphysical possibilities, perhaps.
Well, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you and ask you questions. Are you open to that? And if so, how do they contact you?
I'm perfectly happy for people to reach out and ask questions. The easiest way is I've got a YouTube channel and I've got plenty of videos in which I'm exploring more in depth the topics I cover in the novel The Man Who Kept Dying. You can leave a comment there. I read all the comments. I try to reply if I can. Or otherwise, you can follow me on Instagram and send me a direct message too.
All right.
These are the two ways that are the easiest to reach out if you want.
Great. Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Of course. Actually, two. One very short, which is that if you take it from everyone who's had a near-death experience, don't do as I did. Don't fear death, because sometimes I feel like because I was fearing death, I had to go through an experience that did show me not to fear death. So what I can tell you from my own experience is that yes, our consciousness goes on once we depart our physical body. The second positive message I would say is, well, we are alive on this planet. We wake up every morning, and despite, the state of the planet or the news or whatever negative things we do see, we are there every day. And every day we wake up and we are in that physical reality. So make the most out of it. Live your dreams as much as you can and be in the moment and enjoy your physical senses. Because once you start having a more positive attitude or positive outlook towards life, you start realizing that there are many, many, many beautiful things on this planet. And so I'm culprit of that sometimes. I get caught up in, the daily routine and the daily chores and so on. But one little secret I can share with you is if I notice that things are not necessarily going the way I would like them to, or if I don't feel the passion within me, or if I feel a bit drained, I take a moment within myself and I just close my eyes and I smile for a few seconds. And right away, I feel my body relaxing and I feel that everything's always going to be okay. So that would be my positive message to everyone. Don't forget to smile in life.
Vincent, thank you for your message and thank you for being my guest.
Thank you very much for having me on the podcast. And it was a pleasure to share my story and discuss about many other topics with you.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.